there yet, of course, but we are over the hump, so to speak. And this week we accept the gift of joy. I love Advent so much. I'm kind of ambivalent about Christmas, mostly because of what it's become in our consumerist world. But Advent is something else altogether. It's the thing that most people try to avoid, but it's the thing that we need most, especially at this time of the year when the darkness has crept up on us so fast and death is all around. At 4:10 p.m., as I was writing the sermon, it was time to get up and close the drapes. The sun had never even bothered to show itself that day. Lately, I wonder why I even bothered to open the drapes in the first place. I feel tired a lot and cold and sometimes even a little cranky. It's a sad time of the year for all kinds of people, for all kinds of reasons. And no matter who you are, there is something about all that dark and all that cold that just kind of gets to us. And sometimes all of that sadness that we've held at bay throughout the rest of the year tends to bubble to the surface, and we don't even know why. Or maybe we do. But we have Advent. And I don't know about you, but I would be lost without Advent. Because Advent reminds us to enter into the dance between joy and sadness, where life is lived. We have many reasons for rejoicing and lamenting, and they're always intermingled, making each all the more sweet in its own way. Joy and sadness are necessary elements of the cycle of life, and one cannot exist without the other. So on this particular Sunday in Advent, the Sunday right before the longest night of the year, we are reminded that joy is not the absence of sorrow, but that it comes in the midst of sorrow. And that is our point of connection with the scripture reading this morning. In our story, Persia has defeated Babylon, who had previously conquered Jerusalem and drug off half of its occupants to Babylon. And now the time of that exile is over. King Cyrus, the Persian ruler, who is now an instrument of the Lord, permits a wave of the exiles to return to the ruined city of Jerusalem and rebuild the holy temple, the house of the Lord. And not only that, he instructs that the survivors of the exile be aided, no matter where they live, by people with the means to help them. Once the temple is in a condition to worship, the Jews gather to celebrate and to bring their offerings to God. They celebrate the Festival of the Booths, which was both a harvest celebration and a remembrance that God's people were wholly dependent upon God during the time of the Exodus. During the celebration, the young people shout with joy because they have never seen the temple except in a state of destruction. To them, the new temple signifies a bright future for Israel. The elders, on the other hand, remember what the temple used to look like. They grieve for what was when they see how unimpressive the new temple is. And here's what caught my attention. The people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. Ezra is describing for us the visceral anguish of those who mourn the loss of the way that things used to be. Yet their cries intermingle with the abundant joy of those who celebrate the new possibilities in the community's restored and renewed worship life. Grief and hope, devastation and promise, old and new, they all collide in this scene, and no one could distinguish the joyful shouts from the weeping. Ultimately, this is a story of redemption. But what a painful redemption. It's a story of return. that is marked with grief. It is a story of joy, but a joy that is forever linked to the losses that came before. It's an ambiguous joy. And isn't that how we experience joy in our lives? For that matter, is that not the core of Advent itself? That pain is woven together with the joy of love that has been and the hope of redemption to come. You cannot have true joy until you know great sorrow. In the midst of the sorrows that invade our lives, with hearts aching for the brokenness all around us, it is in knowing of great sorrow that we more fully realize the joy that is coming. The joy that has come. And that wonderful promise, behold, I am making all things new. William Blake wrote, joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. It is right, it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, in the world we safely go. Reflecting on his own experience of the commingling of joy and sorrow, Henry Nouwen wrote, I remember the most painful times of my life as times in which I became aware of a spiritual reality much larger than myself, a reality that allowed me to live the pain with hope. Joy does not simply happen to us. We have to choose joy and keep choosing it every day. And then Khalil Gibran writes, your joy is your sorrow unmasked. And the self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. The poet reminds us that joy and grief flow from the same well. And toward the end of the passage he writes, when you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given your sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. We know deeper sorrow, for we have known deeper joy. And we have known greater joy, for we have borne deeper sorrows. In this third week of Advent, we rejoice in the light while we acknowledge the contrasting shades of sadness. We have many reasons for rejoicing, intermingled with sadness. And Advent reveals that joy and sadness are necessary elements of the cycle of life, and that one cannot exist without the other. The pink candle in the Advent wreath signifies our joy that Christmas is quickly approaching. We hear the stories of our faithful ancestors, and we anticipate the birth of the Christ child. And as we approach the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year, we light candles and rejoice for the light among us and the light to come. Although there may be difficult things weighing on our minds, we are invited to see the light in the darkness and rejoice. That's what I love about Advent. Our culture tells us to pursue happiness. Advent invites us to receive the gift of the presence of God, transforming every circumstance when no lesser power can. Our culture suggests that we change the situation if we want to be happy. Advent calls us to open our lives to the one who meets us where we are and graces our lives with joy. Such joy happens when God is present and people know it, which is why it can erupt in a depressed economy, in the middle of a war, in an ICU waiting room, or in a bout with cancer. Such joy changes everything. Life's transformed as unexpected, not to be believed possibilities open up. Such joy resides deep in the soul, reverberating, opening the way for more joy by shared if together we're to go on in our longing and despair, recalling how God has come to us in the desert moments of our lives, and expectantly yearning for such presence at every moment. In this way, as C.S. Lewis wrote, we are like people digging channels in a waterless land, in order that when at last the water comes, it may find them ready. It's okay to grieve when we need to. It's okay to feel sad, scared, and even angry. This part of Ezra's story, and so many other parts of the Bible, like the Psalms, invite us to be honest about our loss. We can lament. What we're promised, though, is that there is a place to go with those emotions. There is a way to be in relationship with ourselves, other people, creation, and God, with gratitude, with praise, and with gentleness and vulnerability. This is what Christ came to show us, to embody in our midst. In our keenest sorrow, in our deepest darkness, Christ entered as joy enfleshed. He showed us that celebration is not a someday thing, a state of joyous completion that we cannot attain until life gets better. Rejoicing is what happens when, in the midst of the darkness that attends us, we open our hearts to the Christ who comes to us still. And celebration is what happens when we allow sorrow to have its say, but refuse to let it have the final word. May it be with you all, according to God's word. Amen.